All right, everybody. Thanks for coming back on time. And what a perfect flow today. I'm super excited. We had a fantastic morning. Thanks for several of you guys coming back for today. But we really got loaded up in sales. How do we get, connect with those customers in a proactive way and getting our proposals together that really hit the mark? And I love the transition to, hey, that proposal's ready, but now it might be time to negotiate. So, how do we develop a contract that works? So I've already talked to many. They're super excited to learn from this esteemed panel. Sharon, Andrade, I'll introduce you just for a minute. She's got a coaching business. You do a lot of things, I notice. So, and running this whole event. So thanks for being here, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Terrific. Thank you, Bruce. So let's start off with a quote. In business, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. So that's what our panel is talking about today, is getting what you negotiate. And so let me introduce this great assembly of brilliant minds who are going to share their experience and knowledge with you. First off, we have Melia Preedy. She is a counsel with Foster Garvey law firm. She works with large venues, hotels, meeting planners to make sure that all sides of the contract are represented. So we asked each of our panelists if they had a walk-up song when they walk into a negotiation, what would it be? And here's Melia's song. There we go, Melia. But if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need. Okay, next up, we have Jennifer Marshall. Jennifer is a vice president of global accounts with Conference Direct. She has lots of experience. She's worked for a center, she's worked for hotels, and now she's on the buyer side. And Jennifer's walk-up song is DJ Khalid, All I Do Is Win. Come on up, Jennifer. All right, welcome, Jennifer. Next up, he's traveled from across the country. We have Ken Morton. He's the senior manager of conferences and events for the Nuclear Energy Institute. Another person with amazing experience in booking events across the United States, and he is happy to be here and share his knowledge today from the Washington, D.C. area. And his walk-up song is YYZ from the band Rush. All right, I think Ken likes to walk into a negotiation a little pumped up. Okay, next up, we have Sara Waltemire. Sara is the COO of Meydenbauer Center. You guys are familiar with Meydenbauer Center. It's just across over in Bellevue. And so she basically runs the operations for Meydenbauer, and again, has abundant experience because of all of the different roles that she's held. And her walk-up song that she chooses is Under Pressure by Queen. But the question is, Sara, is it you that's under pressure or the client that's under pressure? Okay, and last but not least, we have Jesica McAveney. Jesica is the director of group sales at the Sheraton Grand in Seattle. Again, Jesica has abundant experience at a large convention hotel, working in collaboration with the convention center. And her walk-up song is It's About Damn Time by Lizzo. Okay, so we have a number of different perspectives in the way they approach negotiations, as you can tell from their walk-up songs. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off with a big picture question, which is, convention and venue contracts have changed pretty significantly over the past few years. How is that impacting the way that you approach negotiations today? And let's go ahead and start with Melia with that from your client's perspective.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. So I think this goes without saying, like one of the biggest things that's changed is we now suddenly all care about force majeure, and we didn't previously. So that's a big piece of it. But one of the things that I feel like I get pulled in a lot that I would say is newer in the last few years is negotiating clauses relating to data. So that's like data privacy or cybersecurity clauses. Groups are really concerned about what they're giving to a venue. They want more control over it. And so that is an area where there is huge amounts of change that I'm experiencing, at least with my work.
Oh, interesting. So looking at data privacy in addition to force majeure. So would our planners, either Jennifer or Ken, have any insight to share from their perspective on that?
I don't want to touch it. It's a big deal. It is something we negotiate or try to work with, especially on international contracts. They become a much bigger deal. But working audits, working things like that. Some of the hotels have clauses that are preventing you from doing audits and some of the things like that. So keeping an eye on that stuff, but try to negotiate as much as you can, what you can, by keeping in mind the idea of what data information includes.
Okay, so in the case of audits, that's guest data that you're asking to have access to. So that's become more of an issue. Jennifer, what about your perspective?
Hello? It's definitely an issue. I do a lot of international groups, and they automatically say we won't do an audit, data protection, on and on. But 100% of the time we do the audit, we put it in the contract, and it's just, I go there, I print out an Excel spreadsheet. We don't exchange information electronically. We sit in a room like the old days, and it works. That doesn't work for everyone nowadays. People don't have time for that. But in certain situations, when there is, when they don't want to agree to clauses like that, you have to make concessions. But there's always a way. There's always a way to get what you want. It's just maybe not convenient.
Okay, good. So going back to a manual process. So Jessica, on the hotel side of that, what are the impacts for you? What are you seeing? Like, for instance, with Jennifer's solution or just the data privacy, how is that impacting how you guys work with contracts? I think they're turning. Oh, sorry. There we go.
Sorry, first time. So just thinking back to like how contracts have morphed over the years, I mean, everybody on both sides are trying to reduce their risk, right? Trying to mitigate that, reduce the financial or legal exposure. With privacy specifically, again, we're all not attorneys outside of Melia, but I think for that, we try to stay pretty we'll always engage our legal for that because we are not attorneys. I think for privacy specifically, those laws change every single minute of every single day. And so it's very easy to say, here's for Marriott specifically, here's the Marriott website, if you will, for a privacy language. Again, it's always updated all the time. So it's really hard to have any changes in that particular clause. And then we're talking about rooms out of block already? Okay. Yeah, I mean, we definitely work with out of block, audits. I kind of think in our day and age, technology sometimes is our own worst enemy and our friend at the same time. So, we definitely work with audits, and the terms in which we work them just depend on the situation.
Okay, so force majeure audits, which are really about kind of protecting against attrition and rooms outside the block. So attrition, concessions, cancellation are often the most, in addition to force majeure, are often the most sensitive clauses. Where do you see the biggest disconnect between venues and planners in these areas? So we'll start off with Sara.
Perfect. I think for us, there's a bit of a disconnect of the fact that event space is a finite resource. And so I think for a venue perspective, you might get some pushback on force majeure language or cancellation language because of the challenges with reselling it. Common one we see, we'll get a lot of force majeure language where people will say we want to be able to cancel without penalty if 20% of our attendees can't make it. I understand why people would push for that kind of language. There's a financial impact to the organizer for not having those attendees show up, but the vast majority of people still coming to the city from a venue perspective means that event can still happen for the most part, and we're not as comfortable accepting that kind of risk. And so I think taking the time to stop and think about and understand what's the financial penalty impact to both organizations is one of those areas that needs conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that one of my other favorite quotes is seek first to understand and then to be understood. So Melia, from your perspective, because that is one that's always going to come up, right? So how do you advise clients on your side of things when that comes up?
Of course. So yeah, there's often, obviously on the group side of things, you want flexibility if something is going to change with your event. With the venue side of things, you want certainty. One thing Sara mentioned this, I just want to flag. I think people forget oftentimes that venues or hotel rooms, they're actually perishable goods. If you don't sell that room on Monday night, you can't sell it on the following day. So if someone doesn't show up, the hotel loses. There's not an infinite number of people walking in the door to backfill and use up that space. So when we're talking about how to kind of work on what can please both sides so that there's certainty for the hotel and flexibility for the group, a lot of places where we can land is sometimes having resale clauses in our contracts if there's attrition or cancellation, or we could have a rebook clause if there's a true cancellation of the event that would allow, for instance, the group to come back within the following 12 months and hold an identical event if they're not able to hold that first event. So there's ways you can work around this and provide some certainty in planning for the hotel while still granting the group the ability to, do things the way it needs to do based on its business.
Okay, great, Melia. So with those resell or rebooking clauses, so do those work for our planners? Jennifer and Ken, how do you look at resale, meaning if they can resell the rooms, or rebooking within a window? What are those like for you?
Well, oftentimes we get a rebooking clause for a group where it actually doesn't make sense because they have a rotation. They're going somewhere different every single year. It's never going to work. So that is not a valuable clause unless it's a feasible option where it's a smaller group that has multiple meetings. Resale is very important. Giving back rooms to the hotel earlier than you had planned, if communicating with the hotel. As long as you communicate constantly with the hotel, tell them your worries, tell them that people are registering late. You're just keeping that line of communication open is the most important advice I have regarding not only resale, but just about making sure that you pick up all of your rooms all the way up because people are booking so far out, or I'm reserving like so close in. Yeah, I mean, we have groups that within 21 days, we get 25% of our attendees making reservations. So the hotels can't plan for that, and that's not fair for them in their revenue projections. But at the same time, we know our attendees are coming, so just having flexibility on both sides is really important.
Okay, so flexibility on both sides. Ken?
Yeah, I'm just going to add a couple of things here because my industry, by its nature, is an interesting industry. So in all my contracts, all my force majeure include a nuclear cancellation clause, that if there's a nuclear accident anywhere in the world, we have the right to cancel. And the reason is because if there's an accident somewhere, there's an accident everywhere. So we have plants go and shut down, plants do reviews. Depending on the industry, they're not going to be able to travel. So we try our best to get that in every one of our clauses. It's all part of the negotiation, right? Also we were talking about the attendees. We understand 20% might not work, but can we work at 50% or 60%? It's all about the negotiation. It's all about the relationship. I have a conference that's going off in Savannah in a couple of weeks. I am in an attrition situation right now. I am working with my salesperson and my CSM right now to figure ways to mitigate that as much as I can. My contract says I have to do a rebook in a year before the end of the year. I'm now looking to say, okay, because of the relationship, and I've done about 30 meetings at this hotel, because I have that relationship, we're able to push that a year. So developing relationships is the biggest part of any of this. This young lady sitting next to me to my left, we've been friends for 20 years. And if I have an issue, I've got a conference, I've got something I need, I can talk to her and see if we can work that out because I have the relationship. And when we go into the negotiation, having that relationship makes that job so much easier. You have to talk on the phone. It's not done by email. It's not done by, texting each other. You have to get on the phone, get on Teams. When you get on Teams, turn on your video. Don't go into it blind. Know who these people are because that's the key of everything. And that's what makes negotiation so much easier. So that's the one thing I would say.
That's great. Preach, Ken, preach. I love it. So, and Jennifer basically said the same thing. It's communication, right? So that relationship that you have and that communication that you have. But a lot of times what happens in life is we get busy, we press send on the contract, and maybe we haven't even looked at it closely before we press send one way or the other, right? So what is it that a venue can do to really make sure that they're paying attention to the relationship and truly what the client needs and what they need to understand about the contract? So I'd love to hear from Jesica, Melia, or Sara on that.
I think it kind of to Ken's point too. It does start with the relationship. Engage, depending on your brand, engage your global sales offices early, your sister properties to really understand what's important to the customer, what's going to make them succeed with their conference, right? And then any clause in a contract, whether it's even some of the legalities of it, it's made so much easier when you have that. When you have that relationship. So I would say just start building those early, like from the RFP stage, so that when conversations get tough, and there are going to be some tough ones, it's very easy to pick up the phone, turn on your Teams or your Zoom camera, and there's a lot more, I think, respect between both parties. I mean, we're all trying to, again, mitigate our risks, but ultimately we're looking for a win-win all the way around.
Absolutely. Sara?
I would say it really goes back to before the contract. I mean, most public assembly facility contracts are actually lease agreements. It's more like leasing an office space than it is a contract like you would see at a hotel. And so that's not necessarily where those concessions are going to lie, where some of those modifications are going to fall. And so transparency and clarity in kind of that proposal phase is, I think, where you see a lot of important things. And then if, as a meeting organizer, ask for that to be an attachment to the license agreement so that it's documented in that place. But those conversations should really even be happening before the contract period.
Okay, really good point, Sara. Thank you. So begin with clarity, right? Communicate with clarity from the very beginning, even before you get to the contract stage, and then the contract stage becomes much easier and much more clear. Melia, any additional thoughts?
Yes, one additional thought. So I don't know if this just happens to me. Maybe this happens to you guys too. You get a document and you're like, this group is crazy or this hotel is crazy. And your initial response is like, oh my God, like I can't believe I have to deal with this. I think to Ken's point that he's made earlier, that is a prime time to try and figure out why they are nuts. And to do so in a really early on in the relationship. So for instance, if there's all these clauses, for instance, I had no idea about this nuclear, if there's a nuclear event anywhere in the world, you get to term the contract. For me, I'd be like, what? But then when you explain it to me where, it requires shutdowns in multiple facilities, or maybe it requires experts to be immediately available to go and descend on these areas to deal with the problem, that makes sense to me. But in a black box in the black box that is Word, and looking at the document there and redlining it, I don't have any understanding of why things are being asked for the way they are. So I think having those conversations when you see something that looks out of sorts is very helpful for teaming up to get things moving forward positively.
Absolutely. So we're seeing a theme here, aren't we? So communication, transparency, collaboration. So what about when you just butt heads, meaning you're not physically butting heads, but there's some contract term that you're taking opposing sides on, meaning like it's really important to me as the client, it's really important to me as the hotel or venue. Do you have any recent examples or kind of what do you do? How do you move forward?
I wouldn't mind responding to that.
Okay.
Okay, so I did have this recently. This was, I don't know if anyone's had to negotiate with like a pharmaceutical company. They require a lot. And I had recently had a unpleasant experience with a different pharmaceutical company. So I was like, okay, I didn't like how that negotiation went, but I'm at the start of a brand new negotiation with this group. Maybe we can try and do things differently. And before we sent them any type of red line, we got on a phone call and said, hey, we did like a cursory review of the contract and need to like discuss how we're going to deal with this because this is not how we do things. And it ended up being very pleasant. And I was like, oh, maybe this is my new method going forward for dealing with things versus, you know, the normal, like you're alone at your desk. Maybe you talk to your client, you have the contract and you edit it and put comments on it and send it away. If it's something like that, particularly, I cared a lot about that one as well because that was going to be an evergreen relationship where there would be millions of dollars in business that'd be going back and forth between the parties. So that for me was one thing that was very helpful recently.
Yeah, so really good point, Melia. Rather than just redlining or, you know, going through, oh, we can't do this clause. Oh, yeah, this one's okay. Oh, let me check with my DOS on this one. Can we do, oh, yeah, this one's okay. So you're saying, let's have a conversation rather than just redlining, especially if it looks really crazy and a little bit maybe unreasonable. Jennifer or Ken, do you have any perspective from a client's perspective on kind of what gets in the way in terms of negotiating the most?
Well, so back to the redlining. I love to redline up the contract and have a salesperson just say yes, yes, yes. That doesn't always happen, but you have to ask because if you don't ask, you don't know, right? But explaining the why from my perspective, for my clients, the why from the hotel's perspective, the venue's perspective is very important because we don't need everything we redline. There are key areas that are deal breakers. There's key areas for the hotels that are deal breakers. But I think everyone also, they negotiate a contract, the same contract for every type group. Well, my association clients have a very different expectations, very different criteria than my corporate groups. My groups that are booking 4 or 5 years out have very different criteria than my groups booking in the year for the year. And I think that is oftentimes we get these contracts, it's the same for every group. Well, it's not applicable. And so it's just really important that we pre-negotiate. If you're booking a group outside of, well, at all, but out 4 or 5 years out, you should still be negotiating your AV up front, negotiating your Wi-Fi, electrical. It's a lot of work. It's very different than the old days, but if you don't have that all in writing, obviously your parameters are going to change, technology is going to change, but if you can put caps on fees that are not at the hotel now, any miscellaneous fee that can be added later, you want to have I need my clients to know exactly what the meeting's going to cost. And worst case scenario, this is the cap on this. And these are all areas we never had to negotiate in the past. And it's, you know, I had a meeting with Encore last week for a meeting 4 years out. And they're like, can we talk about this in 4 years? I'm like, actually, we can't because I can't move forward until I know that this is going to be you can do this for this price. And so that's the new world we live in.
I think it's kind of funny. Now, I've been in this industry for over 30 years. When I started, my contracts were 3 pages. You know, they were incredibly small. All this stuff we negotiate now is building from what we've done years over years over years. How many planners are in the room? How many people include, see, I have my own personal contract. NEI we have a contract, we send all the hotels, we include it with RFP. So before we start, the hotel has an idea of what we're doing. And then we negotiate off of that. Does it work every time? No, but it gives us a starting point. I think Jennifer's right. You try to get as much as you can in that contract so you're not negotiating down the line. And you do. Most of my contracts are 2 years away. So if we were year in, year out, boom, 1 year, boom, we're done, boom, boom, boom. And now we're starting to push it down. And now we're starting to add some of those pieces of what we want in cost certainty. And that's now in our contract. We now have like certainties on making sure restaurants are open. And if they're not open, what's the alternatives? We never had that in our contract. We now did because we got burned once. So it's those burning things that now add to the contract as well. So, keep those things in mind as you're going with it. But, if you don't have your own contract, start working on one, and they're gonna fight back on it every time. But when you know what you want, then it makes it a little easier.
And declare that position early by sending the contract along with our
Exactly. All my national sales people have my standard contract.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
you said a lot there, and I'm just curious what's going to happen with, the unexpected. So it's AV and it's some, restaurants. Restaurants were hugely impacted by pandemic. So what else is going to happen in the world of service and service provisions with AI? For instance. But we don't have to go there because I think Jessica had something additional to say.
Well, yes, I do.
she's ready to like,
If
you
I
see those
may.
eyes, she's ready to kill me.
Yeah, I think sometimes contracts, and I mean, great point, they're way longer than they ever used to be. And I've been around about the same amount of time as Ken. And, everybody, there's so many assumptions that people are trying to build into an agreement. And if all of our crystal balls were really clear and crystal, we would be negotiating great contracts with no issues. But that's not how the world works, right? And we see that a lot in the force majeure, and it's just trying to find that balance, and everyone is looking at it through a different lens of risk, right? Just depends on which side you're on. So it's really just kind of finding that shared risk between both the the venue and then the supplier side. As far as fixed costs, the things that get troublesome, I think, for a hotel are when it comes to like service charge, right? When there's labor involved, that's really hard to say, okay, we're going to fix your, or we're going to commit to your service charge of 25% in the next 5 years. That's really, really tough for hotels to do because you're talking about labor, talking about our associates. Some other things we can certainly look at, so. It just depends. Back to, is everything negotiable? Lots of things are negotiable, right? It just depends on, is the program like for a hotel, or are they looking at a program that's filling a specific need time period, right? Did they just experience a massive short-term cancellation and they want to fill that, right? So during those like specific time periods, hotels may be willing to own a little bit more of the risk in order to meet their financial obligations that they have, right? For, our management companies and then certainly owners as well.
Really good perspective. Like you were saying, Jessica, there's a lot of things that was actually one of the questions that I'm not going to ask now, but there's a lot of things that are open to flexibility, but you have to have a conversation or you have to ask the questions, right, to understand what they are. Sara.
To jump on something you comment on of including your contract in the RFP. One thing I will say as a recent example, we have gotten some recent RFPs like this where they get sent out as like, this is non-negotiable, this is what it is. And so one just word of caution I would share to planners, we recently had one come out that had to resend the RFP because they didn't get any responses. And so I would just really recommend think about the way that you're positioning it. Often we're on the front end of the process of what that contract looks like, but if you're going to include something in the RFP, be prepared that people may not be willing to just accept that as it stands, and so just phrase your language in your RFP carefully and maybe say, hey, love to talk about this, because you may not get any responses to an RFP like that.
100% correct. And and the thing is, it's also different with working with you, where I know that 95% of what's written in that contract, I can't touch, because I've had these deals with Richmond, I've had these deals with Pittsburgh working their contracts, and you can't negotiate because they're municipal contracts. So there may be one or two things you might be able to squeeze a little bit, but understanding that it's not. And you're right on that. And when we include it with the RFP, it's more of like, this is where we would like to go. Yeah. Not necessarily that you have to accept this, because there are things in there that I know they can't accept. And, it's more of a guideline as we start going down to negotiations, so we can say, this is where we like to go. Because I think a lot of it is the legal wording is different than, its legal wording is different than sort of those soft issues, right? Having the discussion about what, like, we when it goes to lawyers, right? We make sure that attorney fees are each pays their own fees, right? So we just write that into the contract. But there's certain things that are just lawyer words rather than soft words. Am I right?
Yes, and we plan to keep it that way.
Well, it's job protection, right, Melia? Okay.
Job security.
So we'll go to audience questions in just a minute. So if there are there anybody that has questions in the audience, raise your hand. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how much time we need to leave for audience questions. I'm going to ask one more question of this group, which is, so it's all about balancing protecting your organization, right? Whether it's the perishable inventory of the venue hotel, or whether it's the interests of the members and the organization on the planner side. So, and yet you say that we should develop these relationships. So how do you go about balancing those two? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll start.
I'll leave it open. Okay, thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be the tough conversations. And I think once you've started developing the relationship, you're able to more easily have those conversations, right? And again, picking up the phone, having, especially in our day of Teams and Zoom and what other, platforms are, when you can actually interface with somebody live, it makes it so much easier, right? It allows for clarity and tone, and you really get a better sense of what somebody is what's important to them, what they can or can't do. And then it's, just be transparent. This is what I can do and this is what I can't do. I don't necessarily believe in I can't do something, but there are sometimes legal issues involved where it's like, that's out of my pay grade, right? I'm not an attorney. But I mean, I always do believe that there is a win-win solution at some point. You just need to, find that balance.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jessica. So it goes again back to talking. A lot of times we feel like, I don't have time to make a phone call. So we send an email, but then what happens? You go back and forth like 25 times, and maybe a phone call could have solved it on the first time. Sarah, do you have additional thoughts?
Well, yeah. So the reason my song was Under Pressure was actually because I think a lot for convention centers, we're under a lot of pressure to get our contracts figured out quickly so that you can go and sign contracts with hotels. And so we've got pressure from multiple parties to get it done and get it done quickly. And so taking the time to pick up the phone, or candidly, sometimes I think the best thing for the relationship is there's probably people behind the sales manager and the meeting organizer who are the ones saying this is the way that it has to be. Try and the wizard behind the curtain. Just try and get those wizards talking. Sometimes I think that expedites the process so much, just to have that relationship be developed as well. And I think that helps a lot with trust.
That's really important. So that transparency goes beyond just the two that are in direct communication. It goes back behind the lines too. Great, thanks. Ken, any additional thoughts? No? Okay.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think they hit it right. It's all about trust. It's all about working through your differences, and just getting to that point of yes. But as a planner, I'm going to be the ugly person in here. Sometimes the word walk away means something. If something's bad and you just don't feel like it's going to work, walk away. It's horrible. It's not always the best thing to do. But if you get to a point where it's just not working, walk away and say no hard feelings, but this is not working for me. And you've got to protect your organization. My association, they look at us to make these things successful. And if I don't think that the contract, the way it's written, is going to be successful for enough, I have the right to walk away from it. I don't want to do that, but sometimes you got to.
Oh, really good point, especially if you have a great relationship, but you're walking away this time, maybe not for every time in the future. Thanks, Ken. Jennifer.
So my philosophy is our contracts are a backup. They're our legal backup if our relationship fails. At the end of the day, if there's a problem in our meeting, if there's a problem that we need legal help for, if we have relationships, and if we're booking a small meeting and we've just met this salesperson, we don't necessarily have to have a relationship with the person at the venue, but it has to be with the CVB, with your global sales. with somebody within the organization, then all of a sudden you sit down and you talk through the obstacles. You figure out what's going to work for the hotel. How can we mitigate our damages without going bankrupt, without bankrupting the hotel? And those conversations I have in 20 years with Conference Direct, I've never had a group pay attrition because we work it out. We find new business for them. We find out what their pain points are, when they need business, how we can do it. And it works, but it's not an easy route. The legal route is definitely easier to just cut the check, but there's always a way if you have a relationship. If the relationship fails, then you have to go straight to the contract. So it's important that it's correct and, that you agree to the terms. But
That's great perspective. So really it's, back in the day, going back to, I think Ken and Jessica's day, we did, it was a handshake. And it was then a confirmation agreement. It wasn't really a contract back in the day. So really good perspective, Jennifer. Melia, do you have anything else before we go to audience?
Nope, I feel like that you guys got it.
Okay, cool. All right, who's got a question from the audience? I'm going to go back here first. Yes, you. That's okay. Go ahead and say your question, and I'll repeat it for the audience so everybody understands. You can hear it. Okay, great question. So when you're budget constrained, as University of Washington in this case, what other points could you bring up in order for a hotel to be able to work with you, or a venue, outside of budget constraints?
Well, first off, change your dates, change your pattern, find a hole, just have open communication. I want my meeting here. You just tell me when we can have it. Pre-negotiating all of the additional fees. Can you bring in your own AV? Can you get rid of additional labor costs? Make sure you have water. Like a lot of hotels, a lot of venues are charging now to have water in the rooms, in the lobbies. There's a lot of fees that you can pre-negotiate up front, but at the end of the day, if you're really on a budget, go to a second tier, third tier city, or find a hole. Those are pretty much your options.
Yeah, I would agree with what she's saying. Negotiate as much as you can pricing. Like I've done coffee pricing on a regular basis. I've also done comps on coffee based on my room pickup. So sometimes be creative. Throw something out there. It may not work, but at least it's a try, right? And because budgets can be fudged within your, but 100% correct. Find those holes. Find out when the convention center is full, but the hotels aren't, and look for those second and third tier cities where they're having a citywide. And the hotels are going to have space available. You may not need as many rooms as that, but work within that. And if you're working in a city that's a third tier, if there's a couple of hotels near each other, get them to work together to see if you can do blocks in different areas, things like that. Those sort of strategies can help you. And don't be afraid to say, you have to be honest with your boards. You have to be honest with your CEOs that if we're looking to save money, this is how we need to do it. And, it's going to be unpopular in some ways, but you never really know until you try.
Great.
Yeah, I would say that 100% of the time, if we're looking to help reduce your costs and your dates are flexible, a hotel's always going to ask you, are your dates flexible, right? And that's an important question and very valid, because if we can shift you into a Sunday arrival, hotels love Sunday arrivals, right? If you can be flexible and shift to a Sunday arrival for a downtown property, that pattern is much more preferred, not always, the case, but, or shift into Seattle, like winter, right? January, February, times where the hotel, especially for downtown, might need more business, particularly on a weekend during that time frame. you're going to get a lot more flexibility.
Okay, great. Good perspective. So saving on budget, most of all, be flexible on your dates or your pattern, which isn't always easy to do unless you get ahead of it. Say, since we have a limited budget, can we get ahead of it and be more flexible? Other audience question? Yes. So how did Encore receive the negotiation of quoting pricing 4 years in advance, basically, right?
So we're still in the process. So let's just be clear, and no names and no cities named. But it's more because they're asking for the exact details. Well, we don't know what the meeting actually is going to look like in a new venue because the rigging and all of the specifications will change. It's really focused on putting caps on pricing, rigging, staffing, labor, union property, shadow fees, all of those issues. It's more focused on that and like the actual equipment rental, just capping pricing. But at the end of the day, you can't get an actual accurate bid 4 years out. We all know that, but we can put caps on where where it can't go over. So that's kind of where we're at.
Melia, have you seen any AV clauses in contracts? It seems like it's becoming more of an issue today than it was maybe a couple of years ago because of the rising costs.
Yes. And I've negotiated master service agreements with Encore. They're a gorilla with a lot of these industry events, and maybe Encore is here now. They know, if so, they know that they're a gorilla. Yeah, I think one of the things, the predictability concern comes back to as a big issue for group. For instance, you're booking in advance, and maybe you could have those price increases, but we don't know what service charges are going to look like 4 years into the future. I think probably the biggest times that I get involved with those types of issues is if it's a union property, because they get to be treated a bit differently due to their contracts, their collective bargaining agreements. And then making sure that you're just incredibly clear with the types of fees and service charges and shadow fees and patch fees and all the things that you put into these contracts. From a venue side, you want to be able to carve certain things away so that you're allowed to still charge these things because it's required if you're working with an AV company on site. But you just have to be very precise with how you're phrasing things. So if you're trying to make some agreements with the group.
Okay, great.
Sorry. And most importantly, if nothing else, if you can't get Encore to negotiate far out, making sure that you can have in the contract that you can bring in outside providers, but not only that, all the fees are waived. And there's 1,000 fees that they don't tell you about, like the loading dock, and they need a staff to, there's just a lot of different fees. So make sure that it is in writing, every possible fee, and that you have written, if there are additional labor fees, they're not applicable because you did not let us know up front, et cetera. But if you go out to bid, you're always, everyone's negotiable all of a sudden. So I would always go out to bid on AV.
And one other best practice that I've heard is getting AV even involved in the proposal process. A lot of times it's an after contract thing, and that's where the surprises come in. So, okay. Any other audience questions? Yes, since your hand went up first. That's a great question. So basically, their contract is irrelevant to the application of what you provide. And so how do you bridge that? So I know we're out of time, but we're going to let either Melia or someone else answer that question. Any answers? That's a tough one.
Hello, hi. That stinks. I've been there too. I think the thing I would try and do if I'm in that position when they've handed you a contract for widgets and you're not doing anything having to do with widgets, is to say to them, look, we're probably going to be able to agree to a lot of your terms. Can you please identify which clauses you need in our contract? Because our contract at least explains what the hell the service even is that we're providing. That's at least an angle that I would try and do. I'm familiar with this, at least with like a lot of tech companies will have their master agreement, which is for widgets, and hotel rooms, et cetera, are not widgets. So that's at least something that I would trying to say like, hey, we're willing to work with you, but this square peg round hole, this isn't working. So tell us what you need in our contract and we'll work from there.
Comment on that?
Yeah, please do.
So we run into this sometimes, and the first thing I would recommend doing is just being really direct about like, hey, you've sent me this clause that like makes reference to these things that have absolutely nothing to do with the service we're providing. And so I'd love to start with our agreement as the base for that and pull specific examples from their language that are like completely non sequitur to this industry. And usually that will at least get to the person who's saying we have to use this agreement to start that conversation more effectively.
Okay. Thank you to our amazing panel, Melia, Jennifer, Ken, Sara, and Jessica. Thank you so much for sharing your great knowledge today. If you guys would hang around maybe just for a couple of minutes toward the back of the room in case anybody else has just additional questions, that would be fabulous. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Great panel session. Just absolutely loved it. And we've got our next session starting in about 12 minutes. So, that person was on a board of directors with me. She's really powerful. I think you guys will enjoy it. So looking forward to the next one. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thanks.